So thank you, Bernard Miyet, for joining us this morning. You are a former French diplomat and public servant. You served as the United Nations Under Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operations from 1997 to 2000. And before that, you held various positions in the French diplomatic service, notably at the United Nations desk, at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You were first secretary at the Permanent Mission of France to the United Nations in Geneva, and before becoming the Chief of Staff to the Minister of Communications in France. You then temporarily left the diplomatic service to work in the audiovisual sector, but then you served as Consul General of France in Los Angeles, then Deputy Director of Cultural, Scientific and Technical Relations of France for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And you then moved on to Geneva to become the French permanent representative to the UN. And in 1993, the minister Jacqueline put you in charge of negotiating what is called the cultural exception during the GATT negotiations. And you then became ambassador to France to the OSCE. And finally, in 1997, Kofi Annan nominated you to be Under-Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operations. And you were the first French person to hold the position. And since your term, I think that all the USGs for peacekeeping have been French nationals. And I will add that you're currently the president to the French Association to for the United Nations. So thank you for being with us this morning.
You're welcome.
You're good to discuss about the future of multilateralism, but of course the current events have a bit shifted our topics of interest. So I will try to join the news and initial topic of discussion. So if I can start by my first question, it was that on February 24th, as Putin troops were literally entering Ukraine, the UN Security Council was meeting in quite a surreal atmosphere. And as war was declared during the meeting, it raised some questions about the functioning of the Security Council. And I heard the expression being said that the foxes are guarding the hen's house. So what would be your take on a possible Security Council reform?
So this is a question mark for a long time. Since the origin, it's clear the Charter has been established with the idea to preserve peace and international security. And for that, they took the lessons of the failure of the League of Nations. So the idea was clear. The League of Nations failed because the United States were not part of these organizations. And right from the beginning, it was the biggest problems of the League of Nations in the field of security, international security. So in the Charter and for the United Nations, they wanted to have all countries, and in particular the big powers, around the table. And to get there were conditions which were first that when the strategic interests of the big powers were at stake, they had to be protected. So it means that the Security Council was formed to preserve peace and security, and that the five big powers, which were the winners of the Second World War, have to be permanent member of the Security Council. And second, that they had the right to veto any decisions which might have had an impact on their basic interest. So right from the beginning, we are there. Today, we are at a time of war and great crisis. And during this kind of periods, in fact, the Security Council is stalled. That happens during the Cold War. It happened on several issues. It's clear that in particular for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, all decisions are now blocked in the Security Council because of the United States. And since the tensions that have arisen after the bombing of Serbia during the Kosovo crisis, the unilateral decision by the United States to crush Iraq, and the fact of toppling Gaddafi in the Libyan process, it's clear that today Russia and China have been blocking decisions on Syria and recently on Ethiopia and Myanmar. Now, for Ukraine, you cannot expect Russia to accept any decisions condemning their action, and the Security Council cannot work in these cases. So this has happened. For the time being, no one is trying to propose a new international organization or total renegotiations of the charter, because it might be something impossible to reach. And for the Security Council reform, over the last 20 years, there have been attempts which were fully logical to try to enlarge it, because with 15 members, some continents are not really represented as they should. It's the case of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and it might be useful to change it, but it has not been possible up to now, not because of the right of veto, but because of the difficulties within each continent. France has tried to make a proposal to limit the right of veto when there are situations during which the population is in a very dire situations with massacres and things like that, but this has not been possible until to now. So these questions of the reform of the Security Council is a long history, and I do not expect in the short time to have a response.
Yeah, especially in the middle of a crisis, it's never the moment where things really move on that front. You have spent most of your diplomatic career in multilateral institutions. It is a big question I'm about to ask, but do you think that more generally the Russian war in Ukraine shows a sign of what is called today multilateralism's failure or difficulties?
So it's clear that multilateralism is not in a good shape right at this time, even while when you listen to Russians or Chinese leadership, they just tell that they want multilateralisms, but multilateralism's been reshaped in order to change from a time where there was a dominations by the United Nations. So it's sharing the power between the new big powers that they want to try to have. They all speak about multilateralism. No one says multilateralism is dead, even if all over these 20 last years, they have played with the rules. So they are for multilateralism, they are for the international law, but at the same time, the experience has been such by the United States. It's what I told them before, Serbia, Iraq, Libya, and unilateral sanctions and the applications of the American law abroad. These are problems which show that you can play with the rules when you deem them necessary. It's the same thing with Russia. What has happened in their continuing presence in Transnistria, in Abkhazia and South Ossetia the annexation of Crimea, the presence in Donbass, and now the invasion of Iraq clearly is demonstrations that the international law can be stampeded by this country. And for China, it's clear that when there has been these arbitrations by the International Court of Justice on the panel of it, on the delimitations of the South China Sea, in the problems we had with the Philippines, they refused to accept the decision taken by the arbitrators. So it means that international law is not respected. And through their Belt and Road initiatives, they prove they want also to shape new economic and political international relations, which are directly linked with their own interests and not directly in a kind of multilateral. But this has been the case all along. We will see more things like that in this, but at the same time, multilateralism cannot be put aside, because the new challenges in front of the humanity, all of them, climate change, environment, terrorism, cyberspace, migrations, so many of these challenges in the law of the ocean, the utilizations of the airspace, all these elements internet impose new negotiations, new consultations, and to try to find common solutions. But they cannot be found by big powers directly themselves, or only by a small group of countries. So it's something which in the end will appear necessary. But it's a tough situation right now, and it's a step backward in any case.
Thank you. And to follow up on that, I was going to ask, it seems to be a growingly conflicted world. And my next question was, how can multilateral institutions adapt to this new, not only security architecture, but this new context of conflict and rise of, as you said, the problem of climate change, migration that we're seeing more than ever now? So how can multilateral institutions kind of reinvent themselves to adapt to it?
So they try to do that all along. When you look at the history of the United Nations, the United Nations over the years invented peacekeeping operations. There is nothing about peacekeeping operations in the Charter. So you have this capacity to adapt, to adjust to new situations within the system, but we cannot. At the same time, there were new ways of negotiating and embracing more largely all the stakeholders, and this has been the case with the climate change and the environment. The way the negotiations was organized back in 1992 for the Earth Summit in Rio was the first step of what now is more developed, and in particular what you have seen for the COP21 in Paris, and the agreement, the Paris Agreement on climate change, proves that there is new ways where not only governments are represented, but all the civil society, the scientists, the experts, the NGOs, the territorial collectivities, the big companies are involved in this negotiation. So it's a way now to reorganize the negotiations in order that it's not only restricted to the states, even if they must have the final decisions, because through the Charter, they are the real representatives of the different countries on the scene, but these are the ways. The other elements which had in the past had an opportunity to work has been for Europe. What was in 1974 the Helsinki Act and the Conference on the Security and Cooperation in Europe, which was transformed when I was permanent representative French in 1995 in Organizations for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It's a way to mobilize the countries in a specific regions to try to devise a new architecture of security for the region. What has happened and will be necessary once more in Europe, because we will need to find a solution after this war. You cannot just lay like that, even if there will be scars and tensions, but you need to reproduce this kind of equilibrium, balance, long-term view for the Indo-Pacific region as well as for the Middle East, because these are regions where tensions are strong, and you need to find solutions at the regional levels and not at the global level, even it can be rubber-stamped after that at the world level.
Thank you so much. And exactly, my next question was about what you just said. I've heard voices calling for a new approach to international action, and some people are calling for coalitions of the willing, and even I heard the expression multilateralism. What do you think of this new approach, and do you think it's a good way forward, or that it's better to?
But it already is there. Mm-hmm. I come back to the COP21 and the Paris agreements. You had the coalitions sort of here of the small Pacific islands, which are really in a difficult situations where their survival is at stake. They played a very important role. They gathered together and they tried to make their view known and defended and preserved in the international community. It's through this kind of thing that you can have. You also have, when you have in New York, for example, missions in different territories, coalitions of the friends of a country, of a region, here too, to try to support them in their efforts to reestablish peace and to rebuild the other countries. It's not always easy, but it's far away. And the third point, which is coalitions which are all over the world, and you are part of them when you see the youth generations all over the countries trying to have their ideals preserved and defended during demonstrations in all capitals. It's also a way, and through the media and through the social network, to try to build this kind of coalitions in order to press the governments in every country.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, these coalitions of the willing, we hear this term being used everywhere in the media at the moment. So that's very
interesting. And it's in different stems, because it can be civil societies, it can be specific countries.
Even in military actions, they're starting to use it. I remember for the Takuba, they used this word of coalition of the willing when they set up Takuba, and it was a new word used in the military. It was very interesting. Thank you. Another question I had is a few weeks ago, President Macron asked two former presidents to come and discuss with him the situation in Ukraine. And it was interesting to see Nicolas Sarkozy, the former president, after his meeting with President Macron, he called basically for the creation of new multilateral institutions for the 21st century. So he didn't develop really. Do you think that's realistic? Do you think there would be something to create, or is it better to stick to what we have, just make it better? And if you think there's new institutions that could be created, what shape would they take, do you think?
My first reaction is good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
As you know, is what I told you right at the beginning of our interview. If we had to renegotiate the charter, what would be left of the charter? If you had to renegotiate the Universal Declarations on Human Rights, what would be left when some countries now express the view that these human rights are not universal? What would be the result of negotiations reviewing the composition of the Security Council, the veto rights, etc.? So I think that the problem today is less the need for new institutions rather than the real need that the big powers have the real will to do things, because the problems of the institutions is not the problem of the administrative part, of the institutional part of the UN, which is at stake, of the Security Council. It's the reality of the lack of political will to find solutions by the big powers. If there is political will, you can do everything and the institution will work. If there is not this political will and there is divisiveness among these countries, you won't build anything before long.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think that brings a little bit of hope. If we imagine that if political will comes, then the rest will follow. Yeah. That's a good note. So thank you. That we'll end on a note.
And here it's part of the young generation, social media, to try to continue to press upon the governments in order to create a new, safe and peaceful world.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's hopeful. And I think we're seeing great examples of that with Ukraine. I mean, the situation is awful, but we're seeing also some new motivations and some new concern that we had not seen in a long time, I think, in the young public. So hopefully it will lead to better things and to a new generation more concerned with moving things forward to avoid having things like that happen again. So that's a positive note to end on. So thank you very much. This interview will be available on all our platforms, on the website of Vocal Europe, and will be shared with many people. So thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, and you are our hope for the future.
Thank you. We will try.
Bye. Goodbye.
Merci, au revoir.